One of the things that we say at the West Coast Chamber is that we like to provide access to elected officials. And we're going to do that with you here this morning. My name is Jody Ozarski. I have the privilege of being a part of the West Coast Chamber team, and we're so thrilled to have you here with us today. And whether you're joining us here in person or joining us online, thank you for being a part of this day. Of course, we couldn't do what we do across the board without the support of our sponsors. And this morning, our lead advocacy sponsor is Blue Cross Blue Shield Blue Care Network of Michigan. Would you join me in thanking Blue Cross? We also have two gold sponsors for this morning's breakfast, Request Foods and Tierra Yachts. Thank you to both Request and Tierra. And then if you look on our screens, you'll also see a list of silver sponsors. Thank you for continuing to support the work that we do at the West Coast Chamber. We're truly in this together and appreciate your support. One of our core values at the West Coast Chamber is it's all about you. We want to make sure that we're doing what meets your needs. And accordingly, one of the things that we're going to do today is make sure that you're hearing from the Congressman on subjects that you are most interested in. And so Mike Hill will give you some instructions in just a few minutes on how you can vote to make sure that your topics rise to the top of the list. And with that, I'm going to introduce and hand off to Michael Hill. Michael, thank you.
Thank you, Jody. Well, good morning, everyone. As Jody mentioned, my name is Mike Hill with Total Control Health Plans. I'm glad to be back with you again this morning for this conversation that I look forward to every year. You all should be seeing on the screen up here shortly some directions about a tool that we use frequently at the Chamber called Mentimeter, where you have the opportunity to weigh in and tell us what's important to you. So as I make some remarks, and we have a couple other remarks before we get to the main event, please use your device to weigh in and let us know of the items on the screen which are most important to you, and we're going to dive into the top three as deeply as we can, and then we'll hit some other topics as well with the time remaining. So for those veterans of these events, you are probably quite familiar with the fact that from time to time we have a special guest that joins us to present an award to our congressman. And we're fortunate to have Ryan Gleason with us again. He's the manager of Congressional and Public Affairs in the Great Lakes region from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And I'd like to invite him to the stage because he's got some remarks he'd like to share with us, an award he'd like to present to the congressman. Ryan.
Thank you, Mike. Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that introduction. It's good to be with you all. It's good to, again, be in person. I know we were all together last year as well. And also, thank you, Jody. Congratulations on your new role as Chamber President and CEO. I know it's obviously large shoes to fill with Jane Clark having left, but I know that you'll get the job done. And on top of that, I want to introduce my colleague, Maggie Wooden. Maggie Wooden worked in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill for the Wisconsin and Michigan delegation. So if Maggie doesn't mind taking a stand and everyone giving a round of applause, that would be appreciated. She told me not to say this, but she's a Green Bay Packers fan. I don't know how that sits in the room, so just... So this year, we're proud to announce the U.S. Chamber's new award that are given to leaders who are advancing priorities of businesses on Capitol Hill. At the Chamber, we put a premium on working with and recognizing champions of business. Champions are determined by those who advocate and fight for pro-business public policy while recognizing the need for durable, lasting solutions on Capitol Hill, which are hard to find. Those solutions are achieved when legislation is crafted in the spirit of bipartisanship. Well, today we're happy to have Congressman Huizenga with us and recognize him for our new award for Advocate for American Business Award. He exemplifies what this award means to honor strong leadership, bipartisanship. It's really hard to find that in Washington, D.C., and that's why it's so proud to be with him here today and also here in Holland, Michigan. As a result of building and fostering working relationships on the U.S. Chamber, the chambers across the district with events like this today are one of the events that we are proud to announce this award. Congressman Huizenga and congressional leaders publicly take action to support Main Street businesses that I know that are very important to the Holland community and the West Coast Michigan Chamber as well, including the Small Business Mergers, Acquisitions, and Sales Brokerage Simplification Act of 2021 that the Congressman introduced. That was a key priority of small businesses across not only the region, but across the country as well. So it's important to recognize members like the Congressman, and we need more members like that, leaders like that in Capitol Hill as well. So Congressman Huizenga, on behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Michigan West Coast Chamber, congratulations on receiving this award. And thank you for standing up for business owners like those that are all here today. So Congressman, with those opportunities to grow, thrive, and create opportunities across the country, we on behalf of the Chamber thank you, and I'd like to present you with this award and introduce you as well.
Oh, there she is. You got it? All right. One more? Okay, Brian.
Apologies.
No, you need to come up. They need a photo.
Or otherwise it never happened.
Yeah, that's where it didn't happen, as my kids say. All right, there we go. Thanks. Am I staying up here or going down?
You're staying up here, sir?
staying up.
Yep.
All right.
What side do you prefer to sit on?
Jim, am I on? Yep, okay. Actually, my tea.
So as the Congressman makes his way up here, our format again this morning is going to give the Congressman an opportunity to give us some updates on what's changed, probably not much, since the last time we got together. And just give us an update on his office and his district and everything else, and then we'll dive into the priorities that are important to all of you in the audience. So Congressman, fill us in.
Michael, thank you. Appreciate it, and thank you all for being here. I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege because I've had a number of folks ask how the family is and what kind of where everybody is. I see a few heads nodding as well, and so it does kind of feel like family after doing this for a dozen years, plus all those years in the state legislature. Oldest Garrett is finally launched. Yes, the parents. Yes, here we go. He's been out now for 2 years. He had been working on Capitol Hill. Finishing up with Kevin Brady, who had been the author of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act back a few years ago in 2017. And then when the much anticipated primary and redistricting happened, Garrett had moved back. He had worked on John James' Senate campaign a couple of years ago. Then 2 years ago had also gone down to Georgia to help out on that. I don't want to get into it. But then had, once that resolved itself and Fred decided not to run, Garrett moved back out to Washington, so he works for Salem Communications. They do all Janet Parshall and Eric Metaxas and Hugh Hewitt, and so if you're listening to those or their podcasts, Garrett's involved in that. Adrian is wrapping up his final exams at Kuiper College. And he will be launched and then starts an MDiv, a Master's in Divinity, in Jerusalem in January. So that's been a fun adventure. And then our daughter Allie is, a senior at the King's College, which is where Garrett had graduated from, Media, Culture, and Arts. She's anticipating some job in media. Somewhere or another. Will is a sophomore at Liberty University down in Virginia. He's running track down there and living the life, having some fun. Double major Spanish and law and criminal justice. So I saw Mandy from Zeeland Christian, and we had helped start the Spanish immersion program early on at Zeeland Christian, and so it's been cool to see him be able to utilize that. And then And then our youngest, just as he's taking a bite. Seeger is down here. I won't make you stand up this time, but Seeger is 16 and junior, and we're looking at a couple of different options of what that's going to be. I won't even put you on the spot on what those will be. And then, of course, Natalie, the ever-present and ever-wonderful Natalie is doing great. And we had quite a year, Michael. It was quite a year. So let me start very briefly on maybe the political, and then we can talk about some of the official changes because that led into it. As you know, in fact, last year at this breakfast, Michael became the skunk at the garden party when he said, "So you and Fred Upton in a primary." And I think my response was something like, "Thanks for coming, everybody. We're out of here." We didn't know what was going to happen. We were spending we decided we weren't going to go away in between Christmas and New Year's. We were up in up north at a friend's condo. The prices are around here somewhere. And suddenly the Nonpartisan Redistricting Commission dropped all the maps. And that completely blew up any of the remaining couple of days that we had. That was December 28. I started fielding calls immediately. I think I had my first trip down to meet with a group that they had requested January 2, maybe the 3rd, Todd, something like that. The 3rd, you just gave me the 3rd. And it was 17 farmers that wanted to get together and talk about what was going on. And so we've been kind of just feeling our way through it. We hadn't done really anything up until that point. I had contacted a couple of my former state legislative friends, and John Pross and Tanya Shoemaker, and a few folks that I had served with in Lansing, but we just didn't know what it was going to look like. It became just a whirlwind, as you can imagine. And just a reminder, the district, the 4th Congressional District, is the southern half of Ottawa County. So if you live south of Fillmore, unless you are east of Cottonwood, because these things don't make sense, they split up Georgetown Township, but it's everything basically south of Fillmore, all of Allegan, all of Van Buren, the northern third of Berrien County, and then Kalamazoo County, except for the bottom tier of townships in Kalamazoo County. Only a cynic would note those are the most Republican townships and parts of Kalamazoo County. Is this on, by the way? Is everybody awake? That was meant to be a bit of a joke, but apparently you all knew that. And then Battle Creek. It's in Calhoun County. So we were hitting that hard in between, obviously doing all the other stuff, the official side of what we were having to do. And the interesting thing for me is, and because I've had a lot of media ask, well, what is it like? What's different about the district? And I point out there's actually still the 3 main drivers in Michigan's economy is manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism, right? Well, so if you're hauling north up to Ludington and all the suburbs of Grand Rapids, it's manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. Now, if you're from Holland south, almost down to the Indiana border and over to Kalamazoo, where there's Stryker and Pfizer and Kellogg and Post over in Battle Creek, guess what it is? Manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. Now, I have had to learn a lot about grape growing. Blueberries are blueberries, and they've got a lot of blueberries down there, but there is a huge Welch's processing plant down there. I also had to point out to a few of the farmers down there at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when we would get done with a meeting, they would pop a bottle of the local wine. And I said, my apple growers in Hart don't do this. That's a new thing. Really it's a lot of the same principles of what it is, but it's having to go in and learn rather than office furniture, like as we're here in Hayworth, right? You have to go in and look at precision manufacturing with Stryker or with some of the medical devices, some of those kinds of things. That's probably some of the biggest differences as far as the district. As As far as our operations go, lots of change there. Many of you have known John DeWitt. John was my chief of staff for 11 and almost a half years. He left this summer and is now working for Travelers Insurance. And many of you had known my district director, Todd Whiteman. Todd, city councilman here for 8 years, which he still tells me is the longest sentence he's ever had. But Todd had run the Disability Lakeshore Network here in Holland, and Todd had agreed to become my district director, COVID plus 6 weeks, as he describes it. And so I elevated Todd to become my chief of staff, and that's been a great addition there. Then, and Todd's here, so give a wave if you want, Todd, there. Then the other big one was Trevor Tenbrink, who is from Jenison area. His dad had been the superintendent at Jenison Public Schools for many, many years. Trevor, if you don't mind me saying, started a family, and then this concept of something called a garage and a yard happened. You don't get those in Washington. Have anybody traveled there? Have you seen that? There are no garages there, right? So Trevor and his wife Kelly have come back to West Michigan. Trevor is my district director. He's really, and this is the job that I did for Peter Hoekstra for 6 years. It's really being the eyes and the ears when we get pulled away, right, to what I lovingly call the land of Oz, where it looks like reality, but it's not quite. But Trevor is that main contact, really my eyes and ears of what's going on in the district. I should also want to introduce Presley Lunga, who's here. She does a lot of our casework and is the friendly voice at the end of the phone line. I do want to also acknowledge my brother Jim Berry, who is the campaign chair. And Jim, we couldn't have done it without your leadership 12 years ago. Couldn't have done it again with this one.
And that was a wave from a man that looks like he's done a parade or two in his time.
Yeah, that's all the families. I will close on this because we do have to tell you a little bit about the physical office space. But there was one time when we got done with another Tulip Time parade with our clogs and all the stuff, and our tradition was to sit at the end of the parade route in front of Holland High. We would give the kids one elephant ear to split because that was enough. And apparently not elephant ear fans in here. We got to get the coffee going. But Adrian, without a hint of irony, just looks over and says, "Dad, do you think we could just watch a parade sometime?" And I'm like, "Buddy, probably not." This is kind of is our life, but. So the offices, obviously I'm not allowed to have offices outside the district. Both of the current offices, physical offices, are outside the 4th Congressional District, Granville and Grand Haven. So we have just wrapped up those operations. And I think it was Friday was when we just transitioned out of Granville. That had been sort of our main hub. We are opening an office here in Holland, corner of 7th and in College at the Curtis Center. And yeah, do I have my door? Yeah, that way. Like everybody else, supply chain has sort of delayed that a little bit. So we're still working on the phones. We still have some furniture to come in. We've got a few of those things. So we are operating on a couple of card tables. At some point, we will have an open house there. We are then looking at space for a second office. The population center of the district now is really Kalamazoo Battle Creek. And there is a federal center in Battle Creek. Interestingly enough, it's called the Dole Hart Inouye Federal Center. It was Percy Jones Hospital. That's where my dad convalesced after he was in his B-24 plane crash in World War II. Was down in Battle Creek, and he got to know Bob Dole and Daniel Patrick Inouye a little bit at that time. So there's been more than once where I've sat in Battle Creek and kind of looked up and thought to myself, 75 plus years ago, Dad was up in one of those windows looking down on this town. And so it's been pretty special to be able to do that. We picked up Fort Custer. In my family, it's still referred to as Camp Custer, because that's where my namesake, William Huizinga, went in and out of World War I through Camp Custer. So there's some kind of interesting family ties that go back. But yeah, we're excited for it. Lots happening, but we're going to get an office maybe at that Federal Center, maybe somewhere in that Kalamazoo area. So please stay tuned.
So just one follow-up question before we dive into the meat and potatoes of our conversation this morning. So from a chamber perspective, you've been a big supporter and a friend of the chamber from your time going into Congress, and we were fortunate by the way your district was designed at the time. It favored you quite significantly from a Republican versus Democrat standpoint. With the redrawing of the districts, it's not quite so much the same. So talk to us a little bit about your next election 2 years from now, if you've already started looking down the road there. How did the vote turn out for you this go around, and what should we anticipate in terms of likelihood of seeing you going back to Washington possibly 2 years from now?
Yeah, and to be honest, people in Ottawa County have had expectations. They make a lot of assumptions about things. I will note that the northern half of Ottawa County is going to be represented by a Democrat, Hillary Skolton. As is parts of Muskegon and good chunks of Kent County, mostly Kent County actually. The population center, as I had mentioned, is actually more Kalamazoo, Battle Creek. It is politically very different. This is a district, the fourth congressional district, supposedly was an R+5, meaning the Republicans should do 5 points better than the national average. I will tell you, our early polling did not show that, and we all know this. I've had a couple of conversations already this morning, right? Proposal 3 was part of that. The governor's race was part of that. Let's be honest, Trump was part of that. There was a lot of discussion and people kind of going back and forth with things. The district ended up passing Proposal 3 pretty significantly. It also was won by Gretchen Whitmer, and she came in with 49.7%. Tudor Dixon had 46. She was a point behind, 46.7, and I ended up at 54.6. I will tell you, I'm always interested by these people, because I would have this up in Muskegon as well, who would go in and vote one or two solid Democrat candidates or issues, and then cross over and vote for me. I always kind of want to go, one of these things is not like the other, right? But I think it just shows the nature of what Michigan's politics really is about. And West Michigan has kind of gotten used to a certain direction and thought process, and it's very different. And we saw this across the state. John James was up internally with 4 to 5 points. He ended up winning by 1,600 votes, half a point. I know some of the internals for Tom Barrett and John Gibbs, and it showed it much more tight than it was. I had supporters of Whitmer in Kalamazoo in that area calling me, telling me 2 weeks before the election that she was calling them for support, and they thought it was going to be much more close. And it really was a turnout. It was a turnout kind of equation. My analysis of that is Republicans are going to have to figure out what the playing field is and then play by the rules. We've kind of had this notion that early voting, well, it's unpatriotic. If you're going to early vote, you better show up on voting day. Regardless of whether you think that or not, that's not how the game is played anymore. It's not. And if you look at the two states that gave us the biggest surprises, New York and California, I mean, we picked up 7 seats between those two states, right? And what they did, the Republicans there have figured out that early voting and some of the other things, drop boxes and those kinds of things, they're now part of what you have to go through with the elections. And we're going to have to figure that out here. Our state party has been in a shambles. We can't count on that. Don't plan on counting on that. We've got a lot of internal battles happening within the party about direction. Obviously, you've got kind of the two leading names are both Trump and DeSantis. That is going to be a battle royale, and you'll have some other folks other than that. So the Republicans are going to have an interesting couple of years. Now, I might add, the Dems are too. They got to figure out whether Joe Biden is actually going to be fit for office for another 4 years. And Kamala Harris has been less than stellar in many of their eyes. And so what's going to happen? There had been discussions of Gretchen Whitmer being on short lists for either replacing Kamala or maybe running in 2 years. There's all kinds of churn that's happening. At the end of the day, as far as the policy side, we don't know exactly what that's going to translate into. You know, it's interesting to note that the majority that the Republicans have today is the exact same majority that Nancy Pelosi has been operating under for the last 2 years. We literally just flipped it, okay? We'll see. I think Kevin McCarthy wins the speakership. I think he will get there, but it's, as the British call it, first past the post. Meaning the first person who can put 218 votes together is going to be the Speaker of the House. Now, we know it's not going to be Nancy Pelosi. Because she has pulled herself out as well. Hakeem Jeffries is now the leader of their House operations. Did this go out? All right. Been talking so long, it went out on me. Now, is this one on? No.
Let me see. Is it on?
Yeah, it's on.
Yep, it is.
Let's check. Yeah.
Holding.
We'll just keep talking? Yeah. All right. I'll try to project. I've got a little bit of that West Michigan, love touch in that head and that throat that is so common this time of year. At the end of the day, I think Kevin gets there. If he doesn't, that means 221 other people better get ready to become Speaker. Because if you're not willing to make him Speaker, then you better be willing to step up. This is going to be interesting. It's not without a lot of people. This has never happened before. I can tell you, folks, for the most part, there's never been something that has never happened before. All right, there's always that. There was people voting against Nancy Pelosi when she became Speaker originally. Ask Keith Schuler. He ended up getting run out of Congress because he ended up running against her as a centrist Democrat. John Boehner, Paul Ryan, Newt Gingrich. The reason why Newt Gingrich left is he couldn't put together 218. And Denny Hastert became Speaker of the House after there was, whoa. I just turned mine off. Let me try this again.
There you go.
All right, now is it this one? I think it's the lav. There we go. All right, we'll turn that one off, keep the lav on. So anyway, people tend to forget history about this. Yes, it's true, democracy is messy. If we wanted clean and simple, we'd still be a monarchy. And we're not. That's a good thing, by the way, right? Look, at the end of the day, this is a healthy tension that happens in our government, but we got to make sure it continues to be healthy and not unhealthy. And there's been times where it's gotten wobbly on the unhealthy part.
Thank you for that background.
Yeah.
So diving into the topics that we had kind of outlined as key ones that we wanted to hit on today, when we sat down, inflation was at 3%, and now it's all the way up to 21%. So interesting how that works.
It's been inflated.
So talk to us about inflation.
Thanks, Jay Powell, for bumping that to 21%. No, This is something that I do a tremendous amount of work on. Our Financial Services Committee is sort of the epicenter of much of the policy. I meet with on a pretty regular basis with both Jay Powell and Janet Yellen and others within the administration about what's going on. This is an equation that I trotted out with Powell, and he acknowledged that he thought that this was about right. If you look at the inflationary pressures that we have, about 20% of that is labor, all right? And we absolutely have a labor shortage. I think labor was popping up there pretty high, at least earlier. And it's been policy that has driven that, right? 20% of that is also energy. That has been also driven by policy, right? When we declared that we were not going to be energy independent again, and we have to go down and ask Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and other places to help supply energy, in my opinion, that's not good. But that also has put a world constraint on energy. And meanwhile, I don't know if anybody saw this last week, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, but the Germans have put together what was a couple of year plan in 5 months to put a liquid natural gas terminal into the North Sea. 5 months. We can do this. We can do this infrastructure thing, folks. We have to decide that we have to do it. And remember when President Trump got laughed at by Europe when he said, don't get too tied to Russia and Germany, you're going to, Stolz at the time was the chancellor, you're going to end up ruining the day. Well, he was absolutely right, because what has Russia done? Been Russia. I mean, it tightens down the screws every time it sees an opportunity to do so. So that energy part is problematic. Supply chain is about 20% of all of this. We're starting to catch up on that. Starting to. However, going back to energy, 70% of a barrel of oil is used for energy production. The other 30% goes into everything else. PVC pipe, shingles, asphalt, siding for housing. My family's in construction. I know that. Anybody that's doing a construction job understands what that has been like. So we're constraining that down even further, and we have to onshore, near shore, North American shore. There's a lot of different phrases that go along with that, but the main thrust is let's stop being dependent on our, let's call it, economic opponents, not enemies, economic opponents, and be more dependent on our economic friends and oftentimes political friends. And so if we can work with Canada and Mexico within this NAFTA envelope, what a great way of doing that, rather than having to have it get on a container ship and be subject to issues over in China and much less our West Coast, et cetera, et cetera. So that's 60% of it. The other 40% is monetary policy and spending. All right? When we have flooded the zone with $6 trillion of spending, and again, I voted for PPP, that Paycheck Protection Program. By the way, who in here had you or their company utilize PPP? All right, and the rest of you need to go back and check, because I'm just betting you did too. That was a very successful program, massively bipartisan support. There was something like 3 or 4 people on each side of the aisle that voted against it, AOC and a couple of folks on our side, right? And there was massive consensus. We had 3 bills like that, PPP being one of the largest. There was another $1 trillion plus that had been passed on a bipartisan basis. After that, it all became partisan votes, all down party line, every single one of them. And that has exacerbated where we are at. Anyone in banking or credit union, they will tell you that deposits have never been this high, right? Now people are finally starting to eat into that because of the inflationary situation that we have. But then we had monetary policy that was continuing to drive this. And I remember in the 2018 election, my opponent at that point, I was starting to talk about this. Like, we've got to have a return to normalcy of interest rates. And I remember in a debate, he said, what is he talking about, wanting to increase costs on working Americans and doing this and that? And I finally said, like, look, the analogy that I've used is when the patient is on a ventilator, the goal is to get it off the ventilator, right? Well, we were on an economic ventilator, and we needed that for a period of time. But at the end of the day, you want the patient, the American economy, to be healthy on its own. And when it is just getting fed by the federal government and with monetary policy and easy money, trust me, I've had to remind a few people that interest rates still aren't at their norms. They're getting close, but they're still not at their norms. When I started out as a young realtor after I graduated with my also employable political science degree, few poli-sci majors in the room, that's good. A guy named Wayne Boovy pulled me aside one day as I was at what was Timberbrook down on South River, and he said, "Look, I know you and Natalie are just starting out, but you have got to buy a house now. Interest rates will never be this low again. They had just hit 9.95% on 30-year money." We have to have some of that perspective, but there is no doubt what has been happening has been a slowdown. The San Francisco Fed, all right, not exactly a bastion of conservative thought, it blames directly the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, as part of the inflation that we are feeling. So there's that real policy that has impacted us. So what do we need to do to solve it? Open up energy supplies, tighten up the situation that allows people to not go back to work, right? And you can do this in ways that doesn't mean you're throwing people out on the streets, but we have disencouraged people to work. You just got to look at labor participation rates, right? Older people are back to work, younger people are not. So we've got to tighten that up. The supply chain is working itself out, and we've got to tighten up monetary policy, and we've got to tighten up our spending in Washington. Two things that are very difficult because they swim upstream from what the purely political view would be.
So 2 follow-up questions. First, you may have seen over the weekend, we just experienced our worst oil spill in decades here domestically with an oil pipeline leak in Kansas, I believe. But you just talked about we need to increase energy production. That's been a very political hot topic in pipelines and how we get stuff from point A to point B. Do you believe that that's going to hamper our ability to increase domestic oil production?
Every time something like that happens, it's always a challenge, right? Because you'll have, and I'm not talking, look, I'm chair of the Great Lakes Task Force. I focus in on the Great Lakes issues. I am a part of the Conservative Conservation Caucus. That's a group of us conservatives who are looking for free market solutions to environmental issues. But the more radical environmental side will take this and run with it, right? Because it's like, see, we knew we shouldn't have pipelines. Pipelines are the most efficient and safest way to transport things. By the way, in Canada, not exactly a conservative bastion up there, they had banned pipelines for many, many years, and you might remember this probably 8 years ago now. There was a tanker train that exploded outside of Montreal and wiped out half a town. And the Canadians went, maybe we shouldn't be shipping oil via the rail, which we do right now, right? And they took on a new lease on pipelines. I think we need to do that. It doesn't mean that you don't do it in a safe manner, that you make sure that there's redundancies, et cetera, and I don't know the details of what happened with that particular spell, but if we're not maintaining our infrastructure there, that is going to be a problem. But look, folks, at the end of the day, if we are going to transition to EVs, by the way, it's 6% of the total overall auto sales right now. If we're gonna get away from, quote, fossil fuels, we got to figure out ways that we are going to have power plants operate. We got to figure out, and it's not going to be wind and solar. That's not base load. You're not going to be able to get what we need. So is it going to be nuclear? We've had this discussion now with Palisades, that they tried getting it back online too late. There is a federal program that was literally aimed at one particular nuclear plant out in California. By the way, Gavin Newsom's suddenly become a nuclear fan. I don't know, brownouts will do that, I guess. But it looked like Palisades might fit, but didn't quite. So I know that we've got to have that discussion, and whether it's using sites that currently are being used for energy production, whether it's coal, natural gas, or nuclear, and putting in those modular nuclear units. That's a growing technology, but we're going to have to shift somehow, and because we can't keep doing what we're doing right now. And in the meantime, we still need energy, and in the meantime, the most cost-effective and the infrastructure is there. It is getting oil, and we ought to be not dependent on Venezuela and Saudi Arabia.
So item number 3 on our list, I want to do this kind of briefly and then touch on item number 2. There was a point in time, and it kind of is a pendulum that swings back and forth, but in 2008, 2010 timeline, there was the Republicans in general were beating the inflation, or not the inflation drum, but the spending drum.
Yeah.
But during the Obama administration, and even into the Trump, and currently, it doesn't seem that anybody's really speaking up about spending. So you mentioned that's one thing we need to reel in, but is there a political appetite from any side of the aisle to address spending?
Little, but growing. And some of you know that I was part of a group that we very unoriginally called ourselves the 30 by 30 group. It was 30 Republicans and 30 Democrats that came together to talk specifically about debt, deficit, and spending, and what our debt situation is looking like. We had some moderate success. That was part of the holdup of BBB, the Build Back Better, or as I pejoratively called it, Build Back Broke. The proposal that came out of the administration, it was some of the Democrats on part of this 30 by 30 group, which we've now morphed to a much more boring deficit reduction group. It's like, well, okay, we got to come up with something a little more sexy than that. But anyway, they were putting down some markers on that, and the Republicans were pledging to vote for some stuff that I would have had to do some explaining back home. I can tell you that. But I felt so compelled that we have got to have this conversation as a country of where we are going with $31+ trillion in debt and what this is going to do to our kids and our grandkids and our future grandkids. It's criminal, frankly. And it turned out, unfortunately, that all but one of the Democrats ended up voting for the BBB, and it was a guy named Jared Golden out of Maine. He was the only one of our group that actually stuck with it. There's been some, not tense, but not quite as congenial meetings that we've come together. We're trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to move forward on this? It frankly might be a little easier for them being in the minority, because their reply is, look, if I want to be a part of this, I've got to do what the Republican majority in the House is doing. We had some success with some relationships over in the Senate. Mitt Romney carried one of the provisions, for example. And we're continuing to have those conversations, but it is going to be slow. And there is a lot of us that were raising flags about the spending under both administrations, but it has not had the focus that it needs.
So back to point number 2 then from our voting is labor, and very much tied to inflation. As we're pushing a bunch of money out of the economy, there's not enough workers to go around, you're going to get inflation. So with the baby boomers retiring at a very high rate now, there just aren't enough workers. So
Yeah.
what do you believe can be done domestically to address labor shortage? And then what role do you believe immigration needs to play in helping to address our worker shortage?
Yeah, let's start with that. I mean, that is certainly part of it. That is not going to be the solution. That's not going to be the total solution. But what we have currently at the southern border is not the solution either. That is not an orderly fashion of bringing people into the country to have them prepared and ready for the workforce. So that has been an unmitigated disaster. I was down in Del Rio a few months ago earlier this summer, stood on the bridge where the 14,000 Haitians had been housed down below. It's out of control down there. And at the end of the day, I don't really talk about border security. I talk about border integrity, because we need to know who and what's coming across the border. Now, we can argue about whether there should be more or less of it, whether it's people or goods, but there needs to be an orderly way of doing it. And we don't have that. And look, I mean, it's harder to bring someone out of the shadows to put into their workforce, rather than if taking a little more time on the front end to actually have them come in properly with proper documentation, and then and have them. And we've tried, the H-2Bs and H-2As and a number of the other acronyms that go into foreign workforce coming in. And some of it's high tech, and some of it is more skilled labor. And if you ever tried to pick a peach, it is skilled. It's not easy, and you can damage it very, very quickly. So we're going to have to work our way through that. But at this point, very few people are talking about it, because the restoration of sort of the border integrity has been tied to any kind of solution for the Republicans. And so far, the Dem leadership had not been interested in doing that. So we'll see.
And just not just talking about immigration at the southern border, but there's been folks that are saying that with the sanctions that are imposed on Russia, for example, that there is some very skilled labor that's in Russia that would like to not be there any longer. Do you think we should open our doors to folks that would like to migrate from Eastern Europe that might be able to bring some talent?
Yeah, I mean, we ought to be open on a merit basis for any and all, in my opinion. Obviously it's very controversial with what's happening in Ukraine and there. So I think we just got a signal. So we're gonna have to enter the rapid fire portion of the show tonight.
That's exactly right. So I think we have time for about one more question.
Well, let's make it 2 or 3. I'll make them tight.
Perfect.
Because we want to. Yeah, Natalie's looking at me like, no, you're not. No.
So if I'm correct, you've been on House Financial Services Committee from the get-go.
Yep.
You will now be in the majority again.
Yes.
What will your role be on the committee, and what can we anticipate coming out of that?
Undetermined exactly what subcommittee. There had been discussion of 6 years and out of leadership roles, that we have that for full committees. I have been the ranking member on capital markets for 4 years, 2 years as chair. I've also served as chair of the Monetary Policy and Trade Subcommittee. I sit on Housing and Insurance Subcommittee right now. I had been on financial institutions. So there's some options. I just don't know quite yet. I'd love to get a waiver and stay right where I'm at, because there's a lot that's coming through our subcommittee. Capital formation being one of them, but crypto's the other. That we are the main committee that is dealing with it. I won't ask anybody whether they had anything in FTX. But what I've been saying, in fact, we're having Sam Bankman-Fried in front of our we are doing an FTX hearing on Wednesday. The current CEO, who took over for SBF, is going to be testifying. We heard late last week that SBF, as he's commonly known, may be joining us from the Bahamas. Why, you'd say, why is he in the Bahamas? No extradition. And we'll see whether he does this. He's getting some awfully very bad legal advice, or he's just not listening to it. But so we'll see what's really going to happen. But I will be part of that leadership team with the committee.
Perfect. Last question for you. This is more targeted to the folks in the audience 35 and younger. I also think there might be a great headline in tomorrow's Sentinel based upon how you answer this. But there's some concern.
Maybe we should have ended on that last one. I don't know.
This was originally raised by President Trump, but now it's starting to get more attention on both sides of the aisle again. TikTok being a Chinese company and what it means for cybersecurity. What do you believe we should do about TikTok?
Take it off your phone.
So that was-
I mean, look, you've got more state governments banning it. The federal government, DOD, does not allow it. The federal government, other than the House and the Senate, because we would have probably an uprising among our staff if that were to happen. But let's just be clear. This is a direct line into the CCP, all right? And I've had this discussion with a number of younger folks. They're like, well, what do they care? It's like they're building patterns, right? These folks do not think in weeks, months, and years. They think in decades and centuries. And what they know is that they believe China has been in a dip, and they're on the ascendancy again. And the more that they can know about our society and our people, and whether it's us as individuals or us collectively, the greater advantage that they have, and it is stunning. I got to make sure I'm doing a quick mental check because we've had a couple of classified briefings and a couple of unclassified briefings. So this is all unclassified. But if you look at sort of the data collecting that goes on underneath apps, the amount that TikTok does far outstrips any other app, right? And you'd be wondering, like, well, why? That's the right question to ask. Why? Why are they doing that? And it's not just to serve you better as a customer, I'm pretty sure. It is nefarious, I have no doubt. My strong request has been that our children and my staff not be on TikTok. It could be a real problem in the future.
Okay, headline, Huizenga says TikTok should go, right? That's what
No, Huizenga says take TikTok off your phone.
Perfect. This is always such a treat
But
for
yes,
all of
it
us.
should go.
We appreciate you making time for us. It's important to the Chamber, and with that, I'd like to invite Chamber President Jody Ozarski back up to wrap up our morning with us.
And
Congressman.
congratulations, Jody, by the way.
Thank you.
It'll be a great addition, and all the best. So.
I appreciate that. Congressman Mike, thank you so much for your conversation this morning and inviting us in to listen and to learn just a little bit more. Thank you for your service to this community. We appreciate that. The focus that we've had at the West Coast Chamber this year is that we are all in this together, and it takes all of us to do the work to make this continue to be a successful community. I wish you all a happy holiday season coming up and would love to have you join us again in January. We're going to be getting together and continuing a very similar conversation as we look at our local, state, and federal economy. We'll have our economic forecast on Tuesday, June. Wouldn't that be great? Forget the
Yes.
snow. Yeah.
That might be back about the time I'm back from Washington, actually, after we...
We'll turn up the heat and pretend it's June, but it's January 10. We'll be at Engedi Church. We'd love to have you join us. Until then, enjoy the holiday season, and we'll see you in 2023. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.